and welcome to today's Center for Digital Transformation of Health seminar. I'm Associate Professor Tangerine Holt, and I'll lead education workforce development here at the center. My work focuses on building the capability of the health workforce in digital health, learning health systems, data and AI, and particularly in how we translate these rapidly evolving areas into practical solutions that supports real-world health system transformation. The vision of the Centre at the University of Melbourne is to be a trusted partner and convener in health innovation, catalyzing the responsible use of data, AI, and digital technologies, the safe and equitable development and adoption of innovation, and a workforce confident and capable in driving digital transformation. As is customary, I'd like to start off with the acknowledgement of country. The University of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work, learn, and live, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunurong peoples. We pay respect to our elders past, present, and future, and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the academy. We acknowledge the sovereignty was never ceded. We also extend this respect to all traditional owners of the lands from which our participants are joining us. So some housekeeping before we begin. For question time at the end, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A function throughout the seminar, and then we'll pick it up at the end of the seminar. So today, let's kick off our session. We are delighted to be hosting Professor Karin Thursky, or Kaz, as many of us know her. Kaz is an infectious diseases physician and health services researcher with more than 25 years of experience spanning antimicrobial stewardship, digital health, and infections and cancer. What is particularly relevant to today's seminar is Kaz's experience in taking research and digital innovation beyond the research setting and into real-world healthcare practice. She has successfully developed, implemented, and scaled programs that have improved the quality and safety of healthcare and influenced national policy and practice in antimicrobial stewardship. At Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, Kaz is the founding director of the Centre of Health Services Research and Cancer. At the Doherty Institute, she leads the National Centre for Antimicrobial Stewardship, taking a One Health approach across human and animal health. She is also the director of the Royal Melbourne Hospital Guidance Group, which develops digital tools to support antimicrobial stewardship, including the National Antimicrobial Prescribing Survey platform. So Kaz brings a really interesting perspective on what it takes to move from an idea and research evidence through to implementation, scaled, and sustained impact across the healthcare system. Today, she'll be sharing that journey with us in how I became a digital health researcher. Welcome, Kaz, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Tan. It's a delight to work with you and your team and to be able to present today. And thank you for everyone joining this morning. That little image of me, I tried to tell ChatGPT to make me look like a square peg in a round hole. I am quite glamorous in that picture, I can see. But anyway, I wanted to start with really probably the crux of why I've got to where I've got to. And like many physicians, particularly in Melbourne, we often build up our careers through fractional roles. And these fractional roles have obviously grown over the years, both either through my clinical work and through the departments I've developed, but also through my research. And really, this is where I'm now. And Tanj explained my roles, and of course it sounds like I'm doing a huge amount of work, but the crux of my success, and I say this often, is really about understanding how to build a high-performing team, both from a technical standpoint, but also clinician expertise standpoint, how to build networks that are meaningful and how to create collaborations, because all of those things are fundamentally important to be a high-performing researcher. No one can actually develop a digital health pathway on their own. They really need a lot. And I'm very fortunate across the top there where guidance That department grew out of our work in building out a couple of stewardship platforms, which I'll be talking about, but also drove a successful grant. So we've had multiple grants, two centres of research excellence, other MRFFs, and it is a unique group, which has many collaborations, not just within University of Melbourne, but with Monash and New South Wales, where we are taking a One Health approach, working across all health sectors, including veterinary, livestock, aged care, primary care, hospitals. It's a wonderful group, and our most recent Centre for Research Excellence is very much focusing on digital models of stewardship. At Peter Mac, where I do a lot of my clinical work with high-risk cancer patients, has provided very interesting opportunities. And when I was given the opportunity to become a research executive at Peter Mac to drive the health services research strategy, it was clear that being an infectious diseases physician, I didn't step on anyone's toes from oncology, hematology, surgery, and radiation oncology. So it's been a natural fit for me to work across the organisation to help drive the strategy. And within infectious diseases, they're an extraordinary team with Professor Monica Slavin, where we have built out a huge stream of research, and much of that again, and you'll hear a little bit about before. So over the last 26 years, I've actually accumulated lots of skills which I've been able to leverage. Now, I want to take us back to 1998 now and to refresh your memory of what was actually going on then. So this was the era of the Spice Girls. This is when Apple came out with the first big computer. Google was launched. Furbies was the coolest AI thing probably you could imagine. Doctors were still using pages, branded wares. This is the Spice Girls in Tommy Hilfiger. And we were using Nokia phones. So that is the era when I started my journey. Everyone talks about, well, what is the thing that triggered your interest in this? And this is it. So this is the moment. I was a registrar at Royal Melbourne Hospital. I was in my finishing my first year of advanced training, and this paper came out. And this is a New England Journal of Medicine. It is the top journal, in medicine. The holy grail. It is like both the holy grail of journals, but also this particular program, which had been developed in a hospital in Utah. It was a decision support system that helped prescribers choose antimicrobials. It was trialled in the intensive care unit, and it significantly improved the quality of prescribing, but at that time didn't particularly, there was no significant change in mortality. But at the time, it had an accompanying editorial, and the editorial said, this is a holy grail. This is where we need to get to. So I actually visited a couple of years later, actually, to visited the hospital and followed them around. And the hospital itself had developed its own language, HELP, which was a technical language at the time, which wasn't transferable out. And I had said to my team at Royal, why don't we get a license for this application? And I inquired, and they said, "Oh, look, we can't scale the application, but you can have the dictionary for 700,000 US." And I went, "Okay." So my direction then was, well, okay, this is really interesting, but what can I do? So these are the people that allowed me to launch my pathway, and it was such a great project. So Rana McIntyre, who's now at University of New South Wales, and Kirby, very prominent expert in epidemiological surveillance of infections, was at the time the director of epidemiology at Royal Melbourne Hospital. Amazing lady. She came in on a Monday morning one day and said, "Kaz, I've actually written a grant for a grant with the Department of Health Department of Victoria for us to develop a decision support system. And if we get the funding, you're going to do it." And I said, "Okay." Graham Brown at the time, the professor of medicine and head of VIDS, was one of those people that allowed you to that autonomy to take that direction because no one was doing anything like this. And in fact, my thesis, my MD thesis, was through Monash was called an unsupervised thesis, which had 2 rounds of reviews because at the time I didn't really have a supervisor in the true sense. And of course, Jeff, who is an absolute character, was very, very excited, and he helped drive the work that I was doing in ICU. Now, along the bottom are 3 amazing people, independently have had extraordinary careers. Hugo Stevenson was a doctor who did a neural network PhD while he was doing medicine and had developed a new markup language. And he is, I collectively I always call him a genius just because he's just fascinating in his thought processes. And we were, when I met with him, he was very excited, was immediately jumped on board. And he brought in Michael Mayamov, uh, whose role will become evident in a second. And Michael looks slightly crazy there, but he wasn't so crazy back then. He's a software engineer and had done a psychology degree, and so really was one of those early human computer interaction guys. And then Bron had come from Tassie. He had hippie parents, which is why he's called Brongonwana. And watching him code was really like watching someone on a television show when they just code and sort of the script comes down the screen. And his ability to solve complex technological issues to help drive the program development was amazing. So that's some of the team behind me when I started this journey. This was really the first time I recognized just how important understanding the problem is and what the use case is going to be, and understanding that you can build the best technology in the world, but if you don't understand how it's going to be used or what it's going to be used for, it will not be successful. So my task, I said to Michael, who had just finished his degrees, go into ICU and observe how antibiotic decisions are made in the intensive care unit at Royal Melbourne. And he was in there for nearly 3 months. And he used a methodology called contextual analysis, which at the time was primarily used in business circles in business. And you can see sort of the chaos really there about all the people that will interact with an antibiotic script. There is a heavy line around the residents and the registrars. And these are the guys that have to chase a lot of results to communicate with everyone, who directly monitor and manage the patient on an hourly level. And overlaying all of that is the important cultural issues. And then finally, the artifacts, which is, well, what are the things that they actually need to use? So these are things like the drug chart. And just remember, at the time, Royal Melbourne did not have an electronic health record. So at the time, everything was paper. And those poor residents would spend probably 2 to 3 hours a day collating information to be able to drive their ward rounds, which is a huge waste of time. So this is why I can count myself as a bona fide health informatician, because I learned how to hand code for 6 months the knowledge base behind this decision support system that I built. And this is a markup code called DSML that Hugo Stevenson had developed. And this is hand coded. I didn't have Claude back then. And I had to pull together a huge amount of information. I had some help from some of my colleagues at Royal Melbourne, Kirsty using, but this is a huge amount of work. At the end of that, however, we co-designed, and this was pre having a user interface graphic artist, by the way, so don't blame me for the colours. But this is what we developed, and essentially what it was a real-time microbiology browser. So every 5 minutes, all the microbiology was collected and displayed including its for pathogens, their sensitivity profiles, and behind the scenes, if there was no when there was no susceptibility available, we used the local antibiogram, which we built out. Clicking on a pathogen provided decision support on what to use. It allowed selecting multiple organisms and multiple antimicrobials, and took into account things like allergy, and then provided a dosing as well. And it was very loved by the residents, because you can imagine they would run this just before their round, and showing, for example, negative results are equally as important as positive results. So seeing continuous negative results is a very good driver to perhaps considering stopping antimicrobials. And we monitored that over several years, and using interrupted segmental regression, and demonstrated that we had a reduction in total and broad spectrum antibiotics. And in fact, there was decreased resistance in the gram-negative bacteria. Patient outcomes were no worse, and it was very popular. You're going to ask me, well, why didn't we continue with it? Because at the time, microbiology systems were undergoing change. This was in the early days of HL7, which is one of the data transmission languages, which is very heterogeneous. It was going to be quite a bit of work. It was challenging. And we made the decision, and this was funded through the DHS grant, to pivot to something that was more hospital-wide. This is around the time that my two favourite papers that are completely relevant today, in my opinion, these are what I call the 10 commandments for effective clinical decision support. And the clinical decision support really is programs that can either passively or actively deliver decisions at the point of care. And it's even more relevant with AI, of course. And this is where we know that, things need to be fast. They need to provide something which is meaningful to the user, to be as real time as possible. Sometimes just things that make life easier. And you will see this now with the AI scribes, for example, make a big difference to feeling not too overburdened, that fits into the workflow, promotes inaction, that are relatively simple, that can be monitored, and has incentives for use, and very, very importantly, to have local adaptation. And this is very critical, and something that we know very well with my future work. I don't think these principles have changed in terms of how AI is implemented either, by the way. I always show this cautionary tale because this is the approach that many electronic health record big vendors have taken, where they use rule bases to find things that need to be addressed by antimicrobial stewardship teams. So this is an example of a decision support system in Nebraska. And they looked at, well, what were the alerts? There were all these rules, where they needed vaccination, were they on multiple drugs, was there mismatch? Enormous amount of effort is being spent on drug-bug mismatches when the prescribed antibiotic doesn't match the bug. In reality, it's less than 1% of all antimicrobial stewardship reviews. But these are the rules that were built out, and you can see the amount of work it generated simply in terms of the alerts. So here's over 5 months, 8,500 alerts with only 284 interventions, only 30% actionable, 2 to 3 hours a day reviewing. So this is a very important point. And when we're developing digital health systems, and particularly when we're working with electronic health records, using alerts or driving it through alerts can create a lot of work. And we need to be, again, come back to that point of what is actually the use case. So this is a guidance story. So this was the second grant. This was on the back of our work with Advise. We were funded through a Commonwealth BIF grant, a Business Innovation Fund grant. to co-design a new application which would support optimizing antimicrobial use. Now, at that time, this is really early days in antimicrobial stewardship. We didn't have antimicrobial stewardship accreditation at the time. There were very few highly trained antimicrobial stewards. Melbourne happened to be, the Austin in particular, and Royal Melbourne were two organisations where there was existing expertise and things happening. And the approach we took was to really consider how can we create a systems approach to antimicrobial stewardship. That includes understanding how can we ensure that our prescribers understand from a traffic light perspective what antibiotics that they can freely use, what needs some oversight and what needs special oversight, particularly through infectious diseases. What is the decision support that's required? How can we make sure that they have access to at the point of care, the right clinical guidelines? And once that's prescribed, how can we communicate what's been prescribed and for what reason to the nurses who are looking after the patients, the ward pharmacists who are reviewing and dispensing? And then how can we triage that data for very underfunded and slim antimicrobial stewardship teams to triage the patients that need to see? And finally, what is the data that's required to effectively feedback performance? So guidance was developed and we've had 3 iterations over the years. And I'm not going to force you to look at the early interface, but this was probably one of the first, I guess, one of the first papers that was picked up by the New England Journal as demonstrating a successful digital stewardship program. And it has had sustained adoption since 2005. And just last month, we were very excited, or earlier this month, we were very excited to launch the new guidance as Tasmanian wide. And we have a number of sites in Victoria and including New South Wales. And one of the challenges was that it has been deemed an exempt medical device. And as a digital health researcher and someone who develops software, this is important for you to understand what that actually means when you're going to start to develop something. So this is the evidence base that we've generated. I'm just showing this abstract from Pam Kenichi and co. Guidance has been in place in New South Wales, particularly in a couple of networks for a long time. And this particular network, there were 12 hospitals, which included rural regional hospitals and specialist paediatric hospitals. And this program demonstrated that having a shared system across a 12 hospital network through a common shared model of stewardship was very effective in not only reducing the use of inappropriate antimicrobials, but also showed improvement in patient outcomes. And this is really exciting. And recently, just at our global infectious diseases conference, the same team, this was looking at four of the large hospitals, have shown that they've stabilised their antimicrobial resistance or decreased. And I think that's really a very important outcome. Now, you all are aware of the EPIC rollout in New South Wales, and this is where that challenge comes with understanding the role of specialised stewardship programs. I'm going to pause just for a second for those of you online interested in this, because in February 2021, there was a huge reform of the software as a medical device rules. And at the same time, we had started talking about moving from an approvals-based approach where it was more around restrictions to what our end users wanted, which was more sort of decision support, including support for prescribing unrestricted antibiotics. And we were very quickly made aware that this really would trigger us to become what would be called an exempt medical device, which means our decision support would provide therapy choice based on guidelines. It doesn't process images or signals such as chest X-ray images or some other technology. And it doesn't replace clinician judgment, which is really a key for guideline prescribing. But if we started to look at, PKBD or ingesting other signals, including, wearables or other devices or technology from the hospital, that would definitely change it. Ours is class 2. Um, and so what this means is, in order to do that, you actually need to stand up a quality management system. We already were 9001 ISO standard accredited, but actually to go from that to a medical device required a very large investment and expert advice, and we was in uncharted territories. So we actually met with several occasions a French expert who had helped draft the software as a medical device standards. We met with TGA. We had an external consultant, and we spent many months working out how we were going to build out our QMS system. We use a platform called Matrix, which means everything needs to be documented around the entire product life cycle, user case tests, and we have post-marketing surveillance in place. So this is not for the faint-hearted. And it's a challenge. And the reason why, obviously, is you can see on the right-hand side, this is our guideline building tool, where you can see we've built in these algorithms. This has also been a huge amount of work, and maintaining and supporting knowledge bases is one of the challenges of having a clinical decision support system. We're obviously excited about the opportunities for AI systems to help with this, and in fact has sped up some of our processes. So obviously this is an area of interest for us too. And this is some screenshots of what guidance looks like now, where the user can jump in and look to see where they want approval by indication or indication. If they go through an indication, they will be stepped through rule-based decision support, which has been developed by a committee of experts, and to link to local or national guidelines. We provide a formal standardized approach to assessing appropriateness, which then allows real-time feedback to either at a single prescriber, a unit, ward, or hospital level, and it does look a lot nicer than when we first started. And so, considering that all together, we are in an environment where guidance, the program itself, has been functioning in hospitals where there's no electronic health records, where there's partial electronic health records, where there are electronic health records. And the key to success in those organisations, particularly when there's electronic health records, is that interoperability. And we're currently working in the Parkville precinct to look at Smart on Fire and CDS hooks to see how we can work to embed it. And I think there needs to be an explicit recognition that delivering clinical decision support is challenging with standard electronic health records, and particularly in antimicrobial stewardship, things don't happen until you order the antimicrobial. So it's sometimes difficult to deliver that decision support before that order, and that's where guidance comes in. And the specialised auditing and feedback is really also key here. And within, for example, our hospitals, we do upload all antimicrobials into the platform, which really streamlines and enables them to triage patients that they need to see. Over all of that is an enormous opportunity now with big data to see whether we can leverage that to drive programs that are at a bigger scale, and to see whether we can leverage data science. And I'll talk about some of what we're doing a little bit later. You will hear the term learning health systems, both in the National Research Strategy and also in government now. And really, this is the concept where we need to use data to gain knowledge and use that knowledge effectively presented to build new clinical pathways or interventions, and that we need to be able to audit those in a meaningful way, implement them in a meaningful way, evaluate them in a meaningful way to produce more data, and thereby creating continuous improvement. And so this has been a driver for some of what we're doing. And in my own grants, every grant that I've written since 2013 13, I frame my grants around the concept of a learning health system. So for those of you interested, there's plenty of literature around what that means, but it's certainly recognised that an effective learning health system needs to take in technical, sociological and cultural concepts in how we do that. And the Centre for Digital Transformation of Health has had a wonderful course for learning health systems, which I strongly recommend that you consider doing if you're interested. And they're redesigning the course for next year. It's a great group. So we have data, we need data for various reasons. And so obviously it might be quality improvement at an institution level. We may want to have peer comparison or jurisdictional reporting, national reporting, and for antimicrobials, this is very important. There are WHO international requirements that Australia contribute to international reporting, but ultimately also a huge amount of rich data that can be used for research. So this is a second platform that has been led or driven through our research from the early 2000s, and I absolutely recognise Rod James, who works closely with me in guidance and in NCAS, has been led this work in his early days as a NCAS fellow. And this is the current view of what we call the NAPS, fondly called the NAPS. Everyone knows it as a NAPS. It is an activity that is performed typically on an annual basis, but the platform also supports more deep dive audits. It's open and freely accessible and to all institutions and aged care in Australia. And it is a web-based platform which has a structured approach to assessing quality of prescribing. Importantly, the contribution to international knowledge is that it is currently still the only platform that has a structured approach to assess the appropriateness of prescribing. And I'm differentiating that from meeting guidelines, and you'll see in a second why. It is now part of the AURA program. It has been since 2015, and has continuous support through the new Australian Centres of Disease Control. And that is managed, the entire program is managed again in my role. I'm in hospital guidance group. And in actual fact, we turned 10 at the end of 2023. And this is some of the teams that have worked with us. Highlighting also that we have had very great success in piloting the platform in low middle income countries. And this down here is Rod and Ron Che working in Timor-Leste, helping them to do their NAPS. It is a platform that provides instant results at the end of the audit. It's very exciting to them, and the data is very meaningful and immediately drives our practice designs or drives practice change. Coming back to my comment before about the difference between guideline concordance and appropriateness, you can see that if we look at data from aggregated data from NAPS, you can see that if you look at just straight out concordance, appropriateness is always higher. And that is because appropriateness is multifactorial. Many patients do not meet a particular guideline because they are complex, some other reason, and you can still go through the process of assessing their appropriateness. And the reason why this is important is, first of all, far few patients are not accessible, and it is also a very meaningful measure for our prescribers. They really like this. This is what they value the most. And over the years, we've developed 5 modules in hospital, surgical, aged care. We've got a new antifungal one, which is more complex. And you can see that we've contributed to annual reports to the national program. We were being very active in helping to drive the antimicrobial resistance strategy. And these days, rather than producing heavy tomes of 100-page reports from the NAPS, we have moved to a more agile program where we deliver clinical circulars that pull together the NAPS data, demonstrate what the level of prescribing appropriateness is, with tips on how to optimize prescribing, and they've been very well designed and are really liked. And finally, appropriateness has now been incorporated into the Australian accreditation framework. And because the word appropriateness rather than guideline compliance, this is obviously a major driver for buy-in for the NAPs. And if we look at the reasons for success, this is also, I'm just sort of going back a second, sorry. The data from the NAPs is, we have millions of prescription data in here, and we have a number of research programs that have utilised the data from the NAPs. And we also make sure that we provide that feedback to our national guideline, the therapeutic guideline group. And there's some great examples where information in the NAPs has helped to modify the recommendations within the guidelines. But it is granular enough here, you can see that many of these findings can help drive new guidelines and practice change. So why was it successful? Well, we have over 5,000 users and we communicate with them regularly through newsletters, but we also invite feedback from them every year to make sure that we're meeting the needs for them. And are we giving them the right information in the right way? How can we optimize the program? And that's been a huge piece of work with our recent redesign, which is going to be launched in February. We've put it up into the cloud, it's cyber secure, and allow international users with their own cloud space to contribute to the program. But the value, I think, is that across Australia we have standardised and validated the audit modules. We provide webinars and e-learning packages and accreditation to show that they can actually formally meet the e-learning to be able to do this appropriateness assessment. We've demonstrated that you don't need to be an antimicrobial pharmacist to be able to do this well. And in fact, our non-AMS pharmacists perform equally as well in validation. And we've shown that it is very transferable. And lastly, of course, the driver for accreditation. This slide I really like. Mainly it's showing some aggregated results from the NAPs showing that over time we've seen significant improvements in appropriateness in prescribing across different peer groups in hospitals. And I think it's really important because we know that improved prescribing will improve patient outcomes. And we are doing a large cohort study at the moment, triangulating NAPS data, patient outcome data, antimicrobial resistance data, and consumption data to look to see whether bringing all that data together demonstrates how optimizing appropriateness. And I think few countries in the world can say we know exactly how we're doing. This is in hospitals, of course. Community is a completely separate thing, but it is a very appreciated program, which is fantastic. And I can't move forward without showing you the team now. So when I first started in guidance in my project, there were, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 of us. Kaz Chen became the first antimicrobial pharmacist, and our team has grown to represent both clinical experts as well as software engineers, knowledge architects, UI/UX designers, epidemiologists, experts in software as a medical device operations and quality, and also implementation leads that allow us to effectively design and implement these programs. So really that sort of resources are huge, and coming into this space as an individual, you need to be partnering with a group that you know can help bring all the relevant aspects for digital health products. And developing some predictive model will only get you so far. It's how you implement it. So now I am going to move into some of the work that I'm doing with data science and AI. And I love this ChatGPT generated image because it highlights the Titanic, which is the electronic health record, but all the data that is surrounding humans in the community and in hospitals that are not captured. So automatically, electronic health records are very biased to what happens to that patient in the hospital. But there's not only the actual data itself, but there's also the so-called iceberg of qualitative data, beliefs, and other reasons that drive practice. And that requires you to consider not just the data, but also the qualitative aspects of information when you incorporate, when you start designing a program. And I'm just going to pause here because it is a little bit of a Sisyphean task at the moment, trying to make sure that people understand that it's not all about AI, because you actually need to frame any AI around a product that's going to be implementable and useful. And I do actually have a parrot, so you might squawk in the background when I say parrot, but remembering that there are limitations, and we need to have experts that can bring together not only the data science, but also the software technology design and implementation. And so on that line, technology is always a tool. It's around the people, that how the people use it. And that means you need to get the use case right, and that implementation is absolutely critical. So my approach over the past has been formulated, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, is understanding that we have the right people at the table. First things first, before you start anything, you need to understand what the work processes are. What are the barriers and facilitators in the case of AMS? What things are working or not working? And we have frameworks for that, and our human factors experts, implementation science, attack it in slightly different ways, but essentially, what are the systems? What's working well, what's not working well? And then when you design the intervention, they need to meet those barriers and address the barriers. And then we need to understand how we evaluate those interventions. Is it fit for purpose? Is it usable? Is it acceptable? Is it scalable? And this is where my human factors and implementation scientists who work with me are so important. And that's encompassed through a design thinking approach, what we call design thinking approach. And I'll give you some tangible examples of that. The first one is that getting from this on the left-hand side, which is complex electronic medical records or scripts, how do we untangle that to then find some meaningful information about quality of prescribing? That is challenging. We know that data collection for audit and feedback is labour intensive. It's possible in hospitals because we have AMS teams, we have pharmacists, we have other experts that can support us, and it does require training, but it's also almost impossible in the community. And this is where using AI is hugely opportunistic. The Data Science Initiative is a grant underway at the moment where we're collaborating with Vets, Primary Care and Hospital, where we're using data from electronic health records to create a common data model, to create a research grade data set, to standardise prescriptions, create a tool for automated assessments so that ultimately we can have a secure research environment where really great data science can be done to see whether we can develop new models for assessing appropriateness for particular indications. And we have indications of interest that we've developed, which are very important. And we have had a cross-stream collaboration with our vets and primary care hospital team. What are the common indications that are driving most of our prescribing? These are common. There are guidelines for these. Some of them require the use of critically important antimicrobials. So therefore, let's start our data science with the most common ones. And urinary tract infections are the first come off the rank. And you can see below how we're leveraging natural language processing and machine learning to build out the models. And this is just an example where we've used a natural language classifier from the EPIC electronic health record at RMH, where while we have mandatory indications, it's often recorded as free text. And after defining respiratory infections as a key indication, there was a huge amount of annotation. It's not just the annotation, it's actually getting the data out of EPIC to annotate. All these things take a long time. We've trained the classifier, and then we are starting to build the rules for the indication. And we've had good success, actually, pretty good NLP performance. And it's been a great process for all our clinical teams to work with the data science to learn the importance of this. Obviously, because of the timelines and complexity of it, we are looking at more agentic approaches and LLM-assisted labeling. Maybe that's for the next lecture, but this is it's been a steep learning curve for all of us. The second program is Einstein, and this is a grant which has been funded through originally an NHMRC program grant, which I led, and then a subsequent MRFF Research Data Infrastructure grant being led across Peter Mac, Leon Worth, Monica, also the guidance team as well. And this is really how can we develop a surveillance platform. Fungal infections are nasty infections. They have high attributable mortality. They occur in the highest risk leukemia, bone marrow transplants. There are outbreaks. You do need to watch and survey, but actually it's very challenging because they're hard to find. First of all, coding is typically poor. Typical cultures that we get for blood cultures often negative. It requires specialized testing. They're often just diagnosed on a CT scan or a PET scan or a chest X-ray. The diagnostic criteria to classify a patient is also very complex. The manual chart review is labour intensive, and I can tell you, having done this over the decades, that to do surveillance just for one patient takes about 1 to 2 hours. It also needs expert clinicians and obviously prone to error. So these are all reasons why developing a AI-assisted surveillance is important. And so this program was to develop a tool to support routine surveillance. We were following a learning health framework, bringing our clinicians together to develop an algorithm, to find cases, to support surveillance across high-risk patients, and really drive that evidence base, particularly with newer cancer treatments, CAR T cells, bispecifics, combinations. We are really, really in a very rapidly progressive paradigm shift in treatment of cancer at the moment, which is fantastic, but we need to be on top of unintended consequences and infections that we see. So coming back to that Stanford design thinking framework, which were mentioned before, this process of empathization, understanding people's needs and context, immediately lets you know who are the key players, what are their problems, and what do they need. And so if we're going to develop something that's useful to them, what is going to help them? And that helps to design a prototype which is fit for purpose. And one of the key parts of that is to make sure you actually have user personas that you can keep on coming back to make sure that it's fit for purpose. And for us, we have infectious diseases, we have the hematologist, we have Lucy, the microbiologist, Arnie, the radiologist, Francesca, all of who have different roles and different needs to understand this data. And that is how we make sure that the prototype that we go on to build is actually built for purpose. And ultimately, what does it actually mean? Well, we have developed natural language processing across histopathology, CTs and PET scans, which has been published. It's great work being led by Vlada Rosova, David Martinez and our clinical team at Peter Mac. But, at a particular point in time, has there been a CT scan or histopath report? Are the white cells low, which increase their risk? Are they on an antifungal medication or not? Have there been other tests, and where the potential sites? And we continually look at those points, run the algorithm to find a potential or proven infection. And the system itself will classify them as suspected or probable or proven. The system assessment then has a human in the loop verification. And the algorithm has actually performed amazingly well. With very good sensitivities, which is what you need for a surveillance program. But we also know that at one of the flip sides is that we know that there are false positives, but that's okay. These are rare infections. They occur in around 2 to 7% of patients. While they are flagging, this still allows us to human classify them as either true negatives or true positives. And so every surveillance system has that false positive rate that needs classification. And this is a screenshot of what the system looks like, where we take data from directly from two hospitals. It's gone live from Peter Mac and Royal Melbourne. We bring together imaging data, we do the data linkage, standardization. It's a secure environment where we apply the machine learning, we train the model, we continually assess the model. We have a clinical portal, which is a secure access. And the whole time we have a human in the loop, making sure that the classifications are correct, and we're right in the middle in our team, validating all the cases that have been identified over the past 5 years at Royal Melbourne and Peter Mac. And it's super exciting because I think it's one of the first programs in the precinct that have actually been able to leverage the EPIC data into a system. And these are my last couple of slides now, just to highlight other stuff I'm doing. So this is Jazz. She's an ID physician and microbiologist, and what her PhD has been to develop a digital phenotype for checkpoint inhibitor colitis, a very common complication. Up to 40% of patients, particularly melanoma lung cancer patients, very debilitating, impacts their response to cancer care and needs dedicated treatment. Digital phenotypes, I think, are a very important future opportunity. So they're like a fingerprint of patients. So imagine if you could fingerprint patients coming with a particular sort of breast cancer or a particular infection, that allows you to either randomize into a clinical trial or to even make sure that they have the right early triaging or referrals to appropriate specialists. So digital phenotypes, I think, are going to be really big. The second program, which is also super cool, this is another MRF research data infrastructure grant that I'm leading, being led through it with Ashley NG, hematologist. And this is, how can we bring together real world data? How can we leverage real world data? And how can we have it accessible to our consumers, clinicians, and researchers, including virtual biobanks to access labelled specimens? And this program of work, we're bringing together 5 legacy cohorts. That's over 100,000 patients, millions of tests and images into a secure research platform. And this again has taken a very strong co-design approach, and we have an amazing consumer group led by Sophie Athan, the VCCC. And this we think is a scalable technology and really going to be quite important to help drive real-world cancer research. So my last slide, again, thank you to ChatGPT here, is just to, I guess, refresh my sort of really strong feelings about this. It really takes a lot of people to build digital health applications, and that collaboration and shared purpose is actually really, really important. So I am going to stop there. But before I do that, just to again show pictures of all the amazing people that I've worked with over the years. Thank you to them as well.
Wow. Thank you, Kaz. There's so much to reflect on your illustrious 25 years. And thank you for sharing all those research insights and executive leadership and engagement and collaboration and communication, and also all the challenges that you have to go through for us to be aware. We really appreciate your insights. There's a lot to unpack, and I think we've got some really nice questions coming through here. So I'll kick off with the first question here. How can researchers increase the likelihood that digital health frameworks developed during doctoral research are adopted by healthcare professionals, organizations, and policymakers? It's a big question, but any insights from your side?
Well, it's very, very important for researchers, particularly PhDs, to consider carefully who you have in your team and who your supervisors are. And my recommendation, it's a real passion of mine, is that I strongly recommend that you need a supervisor. There'll be different supervisors. There are the technical supervisors. Then there are those supervisors who are those that are going to sponsor you to have access to decision makers and policy makers. And I'm not talking suddenly jumping up to, government level, but at all levels of our healthcare system, there are people who are connected, and that connectedness and have been given the opportunity to present at various forums to build those networks is very, very important. And it can happen very early on. So, one of my PhDs, Gab Heusler, who was looking at, ambulatory models for neutropenic fever. You know, I introduced her to one of the European pediatric experts. She was then invited into a huge program out of University of Leeds. She then was put onto an international guideline group, and sort of that propelled her into this opportunity where she's driven a new decision support tool into clinical practice. And so it's really important that you are with people who are going to sponsor you. And in terms of the actual models, it's like a tsunami, you know. AI research is a tsunami. It's very hard, but underpinning that is a recognition about the importance of having the use case. If you get the use case right, then hopefully you'll have the right collaborators that will help to drive adoption. If there's not a clear use case, um, it's hard to drive adoption. And these things cost, right? So you can build something, but then how is it delivered? How's it going to be adopted? And you can build something in your research framework, but if it is put in, who's going to maintain it? So it's that shift of responsibility to the organisation, and particularly with medical devices, that then the onus then becomes on the organisation. So that early engagement around how you do it is really, really important, and have the right people in your camp.
I guess another question was about, are there any insights that you could provide us with on implementation science frameworks that are currently used for the evaluation process?
I I didn't know what implementation frameworks are for most of my career, to be honest. I'm going to be very honest here. It was only in the latter stages when I have formally brought in implementation scientists, Denise O'Connor, Lisa Guccione, and other IMPSI people in the precinct, and they're amazing. And also the human factors experts, Melissa Baysari and her team, into my centre now. I don't think you have to always use a formal framework, but what I would encourage you to think about is that whatever you develop goes into a system, and you need to spend that time to understand what the barriers. So essentially, implementation science frameworks typically will try and unpick what the barriers and facilitators are. For me, I used to bucket them. What are the structural barriers? What are the process measures that they can't get or what they want? What are the outcome measures that we're looking for? And if we take all that into account, what is it that you need? So this is not a digital project, but in my early work with building out sepsis pathways, if you don't have enough nurse cannulators on the ward, and your guideline says your patient needs to get antibiotics within 30 minutes or an hour, and you're relying on one or two residents overnight, well, you can't speed up treatment without having the right structures in place. And it's no different to digital health. My biggest barriers for me, right, to be honest, is actually trying to drive that, um, really is to drive that opportunity for interoperability. That's a business decision by the organisation. There's never a technical barrier. It's actually a business decision to support that.
And you talk so much, Kaz, about the importance of multidisciplinary teams
Yes.
and bringing people together. What if there's someone who has an engineering background and they want to get started? Any advice to get them into the flow of doing things and business with?
Well, we are very excited to meet our engineers, and they are going to be huge for us now. And I would strongly encourage you to reach out. There will be clinicians will be super excited. It's bridging that sort of divide between the healthcare system and the university sometimes. And I don't think we've done it as well as we should. And this is where what I call that learning health approach is so critical. If you create what I call a learning health community, you bring together the executives, the clinicians, the software engineers, the data scientists, the um, implementation scientists, the consumers, don't forget the consumers, into that community at the very start of your project so that everyone is aware of their needs. That, for me, is the starting point for most projects now.
Well, I think we're almost at time here. Can we please thank Professor Kaz Thursky for a wonderful presentation, deep insights, sharing the good, the bad, the challenges, the positives, the exciting moves that as we go into this year and going forward into our research and implementation. We really appreciate your contribution today, Kaz, and thank you very much. And congratulations on such a fantastic career.
Thanks, Tanj, and thanks everyone for listening.